Hi, I'm Sister Simone Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of Network, Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, and leader of Nuns on the Bus. And I am so excited for this site visit because we're in Michigan, in the upper part of the upper part of the Lower Peninsula, and we're visiting with the Native Justice Coalition to hear about the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe culture, to hear about their land and location, and to hear about the work that's being done by this amazing organization. So let's welcome our guests. Oh, Cecilia, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of us. And I know hopefully one of your colleagues, Sarah's going to be joining us soon, but we're just so glad that we've been able to, virtually anyway, stop and visit. And could you talk a little bit about, first of all, the context of your work, about the work of your people, where you're located, what the reality is, so our people across the country, all the way down in Texas or out in California, might get a feel for your environment?
Yes, the Native Justice Coalition was founded in 2016, and we focus primarily on Native-led social and racial justice in Anishinaabe Aki. And our home territory is huge. So we are in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ontario, and parts of Manitoba as well. We were founded after an event in the Keweenaw Indian community when I was working as a consultant with the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. In 2015, we had a Healing Stories on racial equity. And at the time, it was a part of a larger statewide racial equity coalition where these events on Healing Stories took place. The other events took place in Detroit, Flint, and Benton Harbor, and we were the only Native community in which this event took place. The event was a huge success. We had 16 story shares and about 60 event attendees. And comparing that with Genesee County, where Flint is located, we were in Baraga County, so the population is much different. And we did have such comparable numbers to Flint, but I would say the numbers were more considering the population difference. Sure. So with Flint, this is before the information came out about the water crisis. And basically, they had about the same amount of story shares and 100 event attendees. So, you know, when this event was over, we had that success and we already had those collaborations. And that's how we decided to, go ahead and form the Native Justice Coalition.
Wow, how important. That's exciting. So who's part of the coalition at this point? I'm sure it is that your people would be really responsive to it. How are you shaped and formed, and what are your projects at this point?
Well, as a Native Justice Coalition, we are just that. So we work with our Native communities. We work with Native-led organizations, other community-based organizations that focus on racial justice. And, you know, we have a new partner that we work with this year that is also working in their nation, the Menominee Nation. So even though we're very focused on our Anishinaabe communities here in the Great Lakes and the Midwest, we also partner with other Great Lakes Native nations and other Native-led organizations. I'd like to highlight Minnekamekam. They are an organization that is based in the Menominee Nation, and they work on similar issues. So we are working with them, and we will continue to partner with them on some of our programs.
Wow, that's exciting. I was just thinking that it's like a map that I don't know. I'm all into geography, so as you were talking about the spread of your people, whoa, I have a lot to learn. So I'm going to try to learn everything I can during this hour. So help me if I get something wrong. I apologize, but I just don't know enough. So talk to me about this engagement for justice, because I was reading in some of the notes that I got is that it's really grounded in your tribal heritage and in how you come as a Native people to a sense of justice and inclusion. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So as mentioned, the Native Justice Coalition, we are exactly that. And we are a Native-led organization. And basically, because we're based in our home territory, Anishinaabe Aki, we follow a lot of our cultural beliefs and traditions. So say when we have one of our Anishinaabe healing stories and racial justice events, we make sure that we have the cultural supports in place. And our approach, we've been fighting for racial justice since 1492. So it hasn't ended. Unfortunately, we have much work to do. And we're up against still a lot of systemic racism, oppression, and racism on a day-to-day basis in our own communities. Basically, what we focus on, what we work on, and the culture is critical to this work. And it builds that strength within our people and our communities. It's integral to who we are. It's how we view the world. It's our maps. It's our homeland. It's this work.
It's everything. It's everything. Wow. And it makes me think that I think so often I refer to my culture as the wallpaper of my life. And I'm not very usually aware of the wallpaper. I just take it for granted. But as you're saying that, Cecilia, I was thinking, oh, yeah, I come from a European culture that used the Greek idea of body soul separate and the dichotomy. And the little bit of notes that I was reading is that you all come at it more from a sense of unity, or I don't know how you talk about it, but I'm curious. Can you help us understand?
Yeah, and I think, there are many different traditions, and there's traditions that relate to Anishinaabe culture. And if you look back at the European culture, and then you go way back when there were the tribes of Europe, there were similar, cultural beliefs and practices. Like with the Sami people that are in Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Russia, there's many similar things to the Anishinaabe culture. And so you find those similarities, but it's really critical to look at that and understand it. Even though it may be far away and far removed, there are the similarities. It's important not to appropriate or romanticize or fetishize, who we are as a people here in US and Canada. But basically it is critical to our work, the teachings and how we apply them to our programming and to, this difficult work. Without it, I think it would look much different. So we are unique in that sense that, we do, and we'll have, of course, being inclusive and open, we have representation from many other Native nations here in Michigan, where we're based, and other communities that we work in. So just respecting everyone's identity, what their beliefs are in their specific culture. So it's not, a lot of the times there's that kind of cultural appropriation and the new age fetishization of, it's all Native American spirituality. That's not true. There's different beliefs from Cree to Lakota to, Ojibwe and to Cherokee. So there's differences, huge differences, but many similarities. It's just not homogenized.
Oh, and that's so important, because I think the temptation of is to put it all together. Uh-oh, we're having some background. Help. Let's see if that worked. All right. I'm hoping this will work. It's better. All right. It's critically important to not put together the various nations and to see if we can educate ourselves, because I think one of the things that happens for European descendants is that we discover something new and we generalize, or we want to, it's so exciting. It's an open door, and I think I could just grab it up and understand it. But I think, Cecilia, a lot of what you're saying is, no, it's highly complex. It's highly unique to different people, the different peoples that you're talking about, and that we need to be aware and respectful. We can learn from, but not appropriate, not grab it to kind of pick it up. Am I understanding the piece that you're saying there?
Yeah.
So with that idea, everybody that's listening, put your hands down. We're not going to grab anything. We're just going to be receivers and learn. But no, it's not ours to grab and take. Got it? Okay. So I'm really curious about the healing ceremonies, because what I'm realizing as I look at the United States in this time of the election is, it seems to me that there's so much hurt going on, and there is so much need in the whole culture for healing. I'm curious, how do you all approach the healing ceremonies with the experiences of oppression and discrimination that you were listing? How do you approach this? What would you consider important to look at?
Yeah, well, it's not, we don't call it a ceremony. We do have ceremonies in our culture, and that's a critical distinction just to understand. So our program, the Anishinaabe Healing Stories on Racial Justice, is a critical component of our work. Racial justice is a primary focus of the Native Justice Coalition. So we launched this program in 2018. And since this time, we've held 6 events across Anishinaabe Aki. We've had 53 story shares total and 195 attendees. So we've held this event in the Keweenaw Indian community in Baraga, Michigan, twice, the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians twice, which is located in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, Hannahville Indian community in Wilson, Michigan, and the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians in Petawatomie, Michigan. So with this event, it's not about, our work is not necessarily about, educating the majority culture. And I'm going to say this for an understanding that we use the term majority because often people will say that we are the smallest percent of the world's population. So the majority culture, people would reference as the dominant culture. That gives, the word dominant gives the dominant or the majority power over us. So I would encourage everybody to use majority because we are not the majority. But as being original peoples of this land, we are, so we are, well, with the smallest percent, we're original. And it gives us, it's just a terminology just to understand in, how we view this work. So we're not about educating the majority culture because what's going to happen is, and you can see right now with the level of hate and racism, and it's not something that is being encouraged to go away anytime soon. The most important thing we can do for our people and communities right here in Anishinaabe Aki and the Great Lakes is to have these programs and to have this support. And we're literally willing to go the extra mile, to our communities. And we do, because we primarily work in our rural and remote Native communities where little grants or philanthropic dollars go. There is a divide. There's not just a divide between urban and rural. There's a divide between the urban and the Native communities that are remote. And the further north you go in our territory, the worse it gets, the less resources there are. There's issues in Ontario that are constantly going around and around in circles with communities that are up in the ring of fire, like Ottawapiskat First Nation, like Neshkantaga First Nation. We have issues in our communities here. And, there's a lot of wonderful things that have occurred as a result of working with these colonial government bodies. However, we still have plenty of work to do. So now coming back to our programs and why this is critical. We focus on healing our people and empowering our communities, that these programs and these events, they offer that place to share on racism and racial justice. And even if it's something positive, we want that because that can also bring a cathartic moment for an individual, tears of joy, happiness, and we have a right to that and more. So with that being said, we want to be there for elders who are boarding school survivors, for those of us who have dealt with racism in the workplace, who are survivors of sexual violence, who deal with racism in their communities on a day-to-day basis, whether they're in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, Grand Rapids, or Escanaba. We want to be there. And these events will spark that healing for that individual. It may be the beginning of someone's healing journey, but it's a start. And with the things we've endured and continue to endure, this is what we need for now. So that is the critical components of that program.
Okay, one of I am really intrigued, and I think you're so right that the prejudice and division in the broader U.S. culture is not going away soon. I'm afraid. Well, it just appears that way. And the effort at the I have to get this right, at the how'd you say it? Not dominant, majority culture. The
majority culture.
Yeah, the majority culture. That's such an important distinction. Thank you for that. The majority culture is that we have no cultural frames for engaging in that quality of conversation. So I'm curious, how do you find folks who are willing to tell their story, who are willing to take a step on this journey with you? How do you begin?
Yeah, well, that event that happened in the Keweenaw Indian community in 2015 was critical to the launch of this work. There have been other initiatives in Alaskan Native communities, but we're really the only program of our kind down here in the lower 48. So we are basically, how we approach it is just building trust. And even within our own communities, it's important to not push the river and building that trust, right? So it's difficult work, and we're not forcing anybody or any community to do this work. And in fact, we do come across that where some of our communities are not ready, and they might not be ready for a while. This is not the fault of our communities. This is the fault of colonialism. This is the fault of creating things like, what we experience sometimes in our communities, the lateral violence and what that looks like. That is a result of colonialism. Gender-based roles that have been established by colonialism, those affect how we interact with each other. Those affect how we have leadership in our communities, how we deal with colonial institutions. It affects who has a voice, who doesn't have a voice, who has political power, who doesn't. So, and political power as defined in a decolonial sense, not in the colonial way of looking at things. So we usually do have, we're working with a contact in a community, and we say, we're interested in having this event. We want to give at least 6 months to organize, and we do this, that's our previous work. If we had increased grant funds, we could engage more deeply. But because we've had smaller grants to do this project, we've done amazing, all things considered, right? So basically, we do the call for story shares, and people will sign up. They'll say they're interested. We have a process of mentoring the story shares. We mentor the story shares because someone might have 10 different things that they want to share. And maybe they get down to 2. And then they come to our event, and maybe they get inspired by someone else who's sharing. And then maybe they share something else. So, but it's a process of, we're supporting that story share from start to finish. As well as the event is also about community collaboration. And it kind of has an approach of what is said here stays here. So the confidentiality is key. We're thinking of moving to a place in the future where we can record these if that story share would like. I believe these stories are critical. These stories are critical, not just for us and our communities, but for people to understand what we have endured and what we still endure as Native people.
Oh, I almost forgot I was muted. piece that I think is so critical is that it's walking with the person. It's not, it's the evolution of engagement and not just a single transactional thing, which I think is often the Eurocentric approach. The other piece that I wanted to mention, I'm a Catholic sister, and I would just want to acknowledge to you that a bunch of the colonial reality came out of the Catholic uh, declaration in well, it started in the 1480s up to 1493 about a doctrine of discovery that was the source of much of this colonial oppression, and that they're acknowledged that we need to, our church is attempting to engage that issue and to try to find a way to healing on that regard. So I just want to say my people have been part of the problem, and that's the truth that we're trying to engage. But I'm curious about in this in your folks that respond to storytelling invitation, are they people of all ages, or are they mostly older folks like me, or who responds? And then how would you have that conversation?
Yeah, it's critical to understand that we do emphasize the intergenerational, knowledge and exchange and community building. So we have had story shares of all ages. We had someone as young as 12, and then we have elders. So just nurturing that voice is also critical. And especially with youth voices and the youth, they may want to only share for say 5-10 minutes, and that's it. But that's important because that's their start to being a speaker within the community, to having that voice that's so critical. And that's something that was nurtured in my community that I grew up in, my family. Like I spoke out at my first city commission meeting when I was 12 years old. It was nerve-wracking. And I was speaking out against gentrification. So we didn't win, but we organized. And that was one of the most wonderful things in my life, is being there with my mother and literally walking hand in hand with her to fight against this development in my hometown. And certainly very much of a foundational thing in my life. So we emphasize that because we know it's going to make an impact for the youth. And they're always going to remember that. So we have all ages, we have different representation, with our two spirits, LGBTQ+. We just want to make sure to be as inclusive as possible. And, having representation, making sure people feel comfortable regardless of their status or their beliefs, their political beliefs, the socioeconomic status, everything you can think of. That's what we're about, is being inclusive.
I love the sound of it, and I aspire to it. I'm curious, could you talk a bit more about the two-spirit culture that you bring to this work?
Yeah, so we are a two-spirit-led organization, and I identify as two-spirit based in my Ojibwe culture from an old school and decolonial framework. Basically, two-spirit, I just want to be very clear from the start, is also something else that is not for non-Native people. So often people will say, well, I'm gay, I've known this my whole life, and I've always felt different. I know, but it's for us. It's for the Native communities. And this term came out of a gathering in Winnipeg in the 90s. So basically, it can describe LGBTQ+, the gender variance and the gender spectrum that exists in our communities. But there's also specific, it's important to understand that it's pan-Native American. And it's just used to identify those of us, that are two-spirit. Some of us will use the label like gay or lesbian. Some of us will not. And there are specific terms. So there's hundreds of tribes, there's hundreds of terms. They don't all just mean gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. So we have several terms in Anishinaabe, and it can mean a variety of things. There's actually more terms than probably what we know. And as we decolonize, I'm actually well connected with many of the fluent and language speakers here in our territory through my small press, Wap Ajijak Press. But it's important to understand that within that, our two spirits had specific roles in the community. That could have been mediation, it could have been peacekeeping, it could have been name giving, it could be stepping in as a parent and taking care of someone else's kids. So there's a variety of things, and it varies. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand and to kind of bring back what we have lost due to colonization. When colonization first started occurring, that is one of the first things that happened, is breaking down the gender, the beautiful gender spectrum that we had in our communities. So we emphasize that at the Native Justice Coalition, is we're in a process. We, as ourselves, we don't know everything. We're in a process of reclaiming, but we want to be supportive of someone's journey, how they identify, or maybe someone doesn't know because they've lived so strictly as a man deemed by colonialism, or as a woman. And what is the way to grow, and what is the way to be inclusive in this work? So that's what we're also all about here at the Native Justice Coalition.
What a fabulous work of discovery, both individually, but also as a whole culture, for the variety and allowing the various perspectives. I love the way you talk about a continuum, and that folks can be anywhere on that and probably change over time, I would bet. But that would just be my guess. I don't know. I'm also curious, Cecilia, if you could talk a bit about your restorative justice work, and how does that enter into this deep cultural roots? How are you seeing that?
Yeah, well, as a young organization, I think all of our programs emphasize restorative justice. And restorative justice, we kind of look at the traditional definition that it's repairing harm. So say you have an offender and a victim. And then that's kind of the sense that a lot, through the law, what you would look at. But it's also, we have that all in our families and our communities. So there may be that someone's healing will bring them to make amends with someone who created harm in the past. And I've seen this happen in our work, and it's beautiful. Even if it's small. I've had this happen recently with someone, and it's just amazing, like, to come back around and be like, wow, the relationship can change. And so, we look at this through our programming, what we're providing the individual, the family, and the community through our racial justice work, through the harm reduction work, through our Two-Spirit program, and through, other work that we do. And it's critical because basically it's ongoing work. So we're in that process together.
Well, it strikes me it takes a fair amount of courage to do this journey. And I'm touched by the courage that you exhibit in leading that, but also encouraging that. Is your community receptive? Are they hungry for this sort of commitment to engagement?
Yes, we've had, with the work that we've had that has taken place the past 3 years, we've had a lot of, interest in our work, and it just continues to grow. Mostly, our connections are in Upper Michigan, but we've actually started building more connections in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. So we just seek to continue to build as we go, reaching out to the community partners that we have in Wisconsin, Native communities. And we have a plan to continue growing this work, and almost have like coordinators within different parts of our territory representing, doing that outreach, continuing the work. There's so many ways we can grow. So, I think what we saw was the biggest growth was last year, especially with our Two-Spirit program, and just people in communities wanting talking circles. So we're not able to be all over the map as, the way we want to. But I think as we grow, having, more staff, that'll be critical to this work. one of the things we emphasize too is, we'll never run simultaneous events. So I am always at every event because I love to be there. And it's just also how we operate.
Well, I think the key is that it's so relational. I mean, okay, the colonial culture is all about multiplying and growing and being better and more and more and more. And so you delegate and all this, but you lose what you're talking about. What I hear you're talking about is the intimacy of relationship and of building courageous conversations and strong relationships to sustain that sort of exploration into community. Because to deal with hard, either personal or communal stuff, that takes courage and a container that can sustain it. So I hear that, and I think it's I would bet it's an important cultural difference between that and the majority folks.
Yes, I would say so. And I think it's one of the strengths in this work is just having that strong cultural foundation to be able to do this work.
With such a strong relational engagement, all of a sudden it strikes me, I wonder, has the pandemic impacted your work and your people? Are you finding new ways or having to discover some new ways, or are you able to continue this intense quality of relational work?
We haven't been able to do the work, based on the pandemic. And so, we had to cancel the Anishinaabe Racial Justice Conference. We haven't been able to have our Healing Stories programs. We've had some events, and some of the events have been outside before the weather got too cold. We've had some indoor events just with precautions in place. And recently things have changed because all of the former executive orders that the governor issued are now null and void. So we have what we now follow through the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. We can have events indoors. It's 20, I think it's right now 20 people per 1,000 square feet. So it's kind of a weird way of keeping track. But, we've had, people being respectful and mindful. And if people are not comfortable attending, that's their prerogative and that's their comfort level. So basically, we are, having some events. What we've had is coalition meetings and talking circles indoors, and just making sure that we follow the precautions in place and just staying in touch with the community. And, we were supposed to have an event in Wisconsin and we had to cancel because the cases were going up, and that wasn't something we were going to engage in or something we were going to do, and just we're going to plan on going there next year. So
I think all of us are called to be so flexible these days. As we were saying, we're doing a virtual bus for those very same reasons instead of doing a physical bus. So I know I miss the physical presence, but at least for us, this is something to be supported. And actually what's interesting is if we'd done a physical visit to you, not as many people from around the country would get this opportunity. So it's an irony. We're learning both missing the closeness, the physical presence, but also benefiting from the broader story. So I don't know, it's a crazy, crazy time. But as you were talking about COVID, it made me wonder, do your people participate in the healthcare system in the community, or are you part of the Indian Health Services and the other specific tribe-related services through the Bureau of the Interior? Could you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, well, it's mixed. So we have both the participation with the majority cultural hospitals and utilizing the services that Indian Health Services provide. So for example, in Detroit, they have a center, and many of our community members that live in Metro Detroit will utilize that center, which is American Indian Health and Family Services. In many of our communities in Northern Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, we have Indian Health Service. So you can utilize that. Sometimes it's limiting depending on what you need, but we still have everything up and running. And yeah, there's resources, and it depends on someone's comfort level with what they feel like accessing at the time. Sometimes in the past, there's been that, and currently as well, there's been that the term called historical distrust. And so we didn't access the health services in the majority culture due to racism or due to discrimination.
Right. And I think that racism and discrimination really goes to a lack of cultural awareness and a lot of prejudice that people bring to encounters with people outside their own culture. And we're not, as a European culture, for being the invaders, we are not very astute at welcoming others. And I think that's been a significant problem. Another problem I'm keenly aware of, because we do public policy in Washington, D.C., is about the underfunding of Indian health services and the lack of culturally appropriate care often. So there's been some strides in that. I think that has been one of the challenges that's being faced, because the federal government's not noted for sensitivity on a variety of issues. So I think that would be a challenge. I'm curious, are people able to move, like for a specialty, from Indian health to the majority health hospital?
Yeah, they often overlap and intertwine. So say you have some sort of diagnosis at the local tribal health clinic, and then you will utilize that, go to, say you need to get a screening, you'll go somewhere else. So, and some, one of the things that I find a lot with my family that lives in the upper peninsula is traveling down to like Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Detroit for more services. And because that's one of the disparities that we have, is the lack of resources, the lack of services. And while you have, a hospital in Marquette or Green Bay, you're still having to travel that extra distance,
Right. And that's a reality that we have found in doing our rural roundtables around the country, regardless of racial identification or tribal identification, is that rural communities are suffering greatly for the lack of access to care and public transportation. That there's no public transit to get to these places makes it hugely difficult. So that's certainly a shared concern. Which raises for me a question. We just did a site visit in Kansas City, talking about migrant workers and the experience of their children who travel with them, of being in a school system, and that rural schools having a real difficult time absorbing different language and cultural needs. And it strikes me, Cecilia, as you're talking, are those kinds of issues a challenge for your people in rural communities with regards to education and access to good education and access to maybe even, graduate education? I'm curious.
Yeah, that is something that is discussed often at our meetings and events, is the divide that exists in many of our communities, that Native kids get treated in a different way in the high schools, or get put in a different high school that is kind of deemed for slower learners or difficult learners. And when it's really the education system that's not catering to our youth. So we hear that, there's a divide right between this school and that school, and you can see it. We all know divides exist. It's not just the divide between the Native community, or the community, like the border town community that is near our reservation communities. It's also in cities too, the lack of understanding, the lack of support. And I could say, even for myself, growing up in a suburb of Detroit, while, there was good things in the education system, there was also many times where people were discriminatory just because I was, a mixed race Native youth. And there was also support. So I just want to emphasize that there's often support, and there's good teachers out there that care. There's school districts that try to be better, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, what you just said about border communities sent this flashbulb off in my head. I forgot you're a border community. And so I always, because we do immigration, I always think of the Mexico border, but I rarely think of the border with Canada. And the way you've described your people, you spread over a big swath of Canada. So what is this like for your organization and for the work of your people to be in two defined majority culture countries, but being one people? How does this work for you?
Yeah, it works in a sense that, well, it doesn't work because we have that racism and that discrimination. So basically, there is issues when we want to cross the colonially imposed border. And, the border town issue I'm explaining is when you have a community that is near a reservation community. So we often deal with racism within these communities. And the other issue where we have in the Great Lakes here with the Anishinaabe Nation is that we do have a colonially imposed border that divides our nation. So in a sense, because of that border, we're not able to have greater political power because it is there. And while there's been progress made on things such as the Jay Treaty, there's a lot of things that still set us back from being able to organize and grow our power together.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for clarifying for me which border we're talking about. But obviously, I have a lot to learn. Thank you. I'm wondering if one of the things that we've heard about is in other site visits that we've done on this bus trip is a real concern about some of the drug use, opioid use, and programs that are about harm reduction or entering into the family setting to make a difference with it when it comes to a drug culture or not culture, drug use. And we heard about it in Ohio, and some of the indigenous people there were involved in this program. I'm curious for your people, is the opioid or the drug use an issue? And have you been, if it is, how does it manifest? Are there things that are being done?
First, let me highlight the strengths of our people. We've definitely had the highest rates of abstinence from alcohol and drugs than the majority culture. And being that we're the things we've endured, it's amazing that we have this. And so we emphasize that within our organization is just highlighting the strengths. One of the things I just want to say with that question is, while I understand you're trying to carefully word it, the stereotype of what we've dealt with for decades and decades of being the drunk Indian. And that is a stereotype because like I said, we have the highest rates of that abstinence from alcohol and drugs. We have a lot of wonderful people in our territories and involved in this work, involved in our organization, who have walked a sober road for decades and decades. These are folks who also turn around and they help others in the community. And that's the work, that's the heavy lifting that a lot of people in the majority culture are afraid to do. And actively engaging in harming our people in our communities. So while this is an issue, it's an issue in all communities. It's not just the Native community. It's not just the white community, the Black community, the Latinx community. We're all affected because addiction is often, there's a root cause to it. And that root cause is often personal. It's often related to that individual's life. And within our communities, the beauty of how we heal together is we emphasize, the intergenerational healing from historical and current trauma. We're up against so much when we choose that path of healing. And we're up against the trauma we don't see and the trauma that we have seen. I hope that makes sense. So basically,
can I just, sure. I think to clarify, make sure I understand that the fact of the communal engagement then allows the sharing of strength, and that sharing of strength then supports your people in this long, what is to be witnessed and recognized as the strength of your people is in this communal clarity and truth telling, the way I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And so with the approach of sobriety, recovery, and harm reduction, there's a lot of efforts taking place in Native communities. Some new models have been applied. There's, a lot of supports and a lot of resources. And I would say that when it comes to harm reduction, there's efforts being made. We have a community partner that we work with in the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. They do harm reduction. And we have kind of different laws here in Michigan, so we can't do what they do. And I don't know the specifics on that. But what we are going to do, our hope is in 2021, when we can be more in person, is at least have talking circles and partner with, programs within tribes that will offer this talking circle, will be another support for community members, and have an approach that embraces harm reduction. Because when you're on that recovery journey, just quitting the drink, drug, or whatever the addiction is cannot just happen overnight. It's a process. And that process is unique to each individual. And so we want to honor that person's journey and their choices. It's also that person's choices. So, but we also want to provide the community with choices as well on this option, that there are frameworks that may not work for people. The AA model is a fine model, but some of our community members don't like that model. So what else can we offer? We have to offer a variety of paths, right?
Absolutely. And as you're talking, Cecilia, I'm just thinking of my niece's husband who just started a detox program. He's in 30-day rehab. And you are absolutely right. It's more than just one person's decision. It's the whole community that needs to be involved. And my family is keenly aware of that at this point. And so stepping in to be supportive, I think that is critical if someone's going to walk this path. You can't do it alone. We have to do it together. All right. I can't believe we have zipped through almost through our time. And I'm curious if I've left something important out, and I really appreciated your lifting up how my questions sounded as if I was thinking of Indians and the indigenous people in a stereotype, and it hadn't been in my mind, but I could sure see how it was layered in that question. So thank you for educating me. Thank you for helping me be clearer about that. And thank you for helping our audience be clearer about it. I'll learn from it. I appreciate it. So is there anything else we should know that we haven't been able to talk about so far about your important work in within your culture, within your people, but also that supportive piece that you bring to your work? What else should we know?
Well, one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that, when the Native Justice Coalition was founded, it just wasn't founded out of one issue area. If you kind of look at the founding of an organization, you can see it as like a pie chart. So you can look at that event that we had in Keweenaw Bay in 2015 and add that there. You can look at the things I've personally experienced, such as racism in the workplace, adding to that pie chart. You can look at the trauma within the family and the community. And that is the desire to create, it's almost a process of going back, but going forward at the same time, because that's a lot of our cultural beliefs. But there's a variety of, issues. There's a variety of things that add to that pie chart. So it's not just that there's an organization that was founded. There we go. You have a nonprofit of 501c3. Check. Everything is going. It's really about the people. It's about the community. It's about our relations. It's about, sparking someone's, their inspiration, because of what we have been through. There has to be a path that can be open for everyone. And maybe when that person is ready, they'll walk down that path. They'll be ready to share their story. And again, as we emphasize, we don't force any of our people or communities to have to be an event attendee, a story share, to do one of these projects or events. It's about when we're ready, but also that we're here and we provide this framework. It's critical to also understand that, as we do this work, that what we're doing is not just racial justice. So you could look at it and say, well, this is racial justice work. It also connects to our treaty rights. It also connects to nationhood building. It also connects to healing, the relations, and how we describe relations as people that are existing currently, our ancestors, which in our culture, in the Anishinaabe culture, we believe are always with us. And it's healing the ones to come. So we have a unique approach in this work. The racial justice work is also connected to the issues that we address, like trafficking, through our MMIW G2S program. It's connected to also the beautiful things, like having a PhD in physics. Just going to give a shout out to my sister. And having a master's degree and having 2 businesses, being a telephone worker for 40 years, just giving a shout out to my dad. Being, holding it down in the town on the res, working at that, that gas station, and there's limited resources, limited opportunity, but you're doing your best. You're going to college, you're getting a better car, all these things that we deal with, and, to celebrate it, because that is just, we need to celebrate the achievements. That's also connected to racial justice. Those are victories. And I'm going to share this because it'll tie into the Nuns on the Bus work. I wasn't going to vote in this election because I don't believe in settler colonial politics, but I don't believe it's benefited Native communities. And that's a belief that there's many of us that out there in the Native community that hold that belief. But I talked to my sister and she encouraged me to vote. So I am going to vote. But the reason I wasn't going to vote is because I did experience voter suppression where I live during a primary years ago. And I've dealt with this in this community specifically, where I know I'm being discriminated against because I'm not the towny white lady in the grocery store. And I'm not the person who's lived here 45 years. I've lived here 10 years. I'm multiracial, I'm Native American, and you know what? That makes people uncomfortable, and I'm glad. But at the same time, when you discriminate against me at the polls and you talk at me differently and you treat me different, that was voter suppression. And I did call it out, and I called the county clerk, and she dealt with it immediately, because if she didn't deal with it immediately, she'd be in trouble. Amen. But so I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to deal with it. My sister said, no, go vote because this is critical. And I believe it is critical. But I felt discouraged. And even as a leader in this work, I felt like it doesn't matter. My voice doesn't matter. They don't care about Native people. They don't care about our communities. And you know what? They don't have the similar framework that we have. Because actually, in the Anishinaabe Nation here in the Great Lakes, what we had, and we are seeing this being revitalized in our First Nations community in Canada, is governance based on our clan relations. So that's what I'd like to see, that we restore that governance. And maybe it's not a way of power over the colonial government, but a way that we have a lot more say, because right now we don't. And so that's how I view it. And I just want to give a shout out to my sister for encouraging that within me.
I want to give a shout out to Sister too. Thank you. Thank you. And everybody listening. This is so critical. And Cecilia, thank you for choosing to vote, even though you risk another experience of voter discrimination, voter suppression. It is a gift to our nation that you would do that. Thank you. It's a gift to me. I'm grateful. But it's the only way that we have a chance to even shift a little bit and be the change we seek in our very flawed, struggling nation. So thank you. All right, we've come to the end of an hour. How fast was that? I've learned a lot. Thank you for educating us. Thank you for bringing us along. Thank you for giving us a window into another way of being. We promise not to try to appropriate it. We promise to try to reverence it. And we promise to learn for the future so that we can let go of the colonial piece, be the majority, not the dominant. We might be the majority, but the majority is always interested in welcoming in the more. So we can be bigger. Thank you for helping us to learn that, Cecilia. I'll carry these learnings with me. It was important. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for inviting me and our organization.
Oh, happy to do it. Support their organization, you all. We need you.